Hi everyone, in this video I will answer the question, what are the signs of the second coming? By second coming I mean the return of Christ in our future. What are the signs? Are there even any signs? And I'm not giving you my answer, but the answer Jesus gave when he was asked this very question. It's found in the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24 and 25. Now there's a lot of confusion out there and many people saying this is a sign and that is a sign, or saying Jesus is coming back any day now. What would Jesus himself have to say about all this? Let me show you. This video is part of my series on the Olivet Discourse, and we've reached the point where Jesus has finished his answer to the disciples' first concern and will now answer their second concern. Let me quickly remind you that in Matthew, the disciples asked two questions about these two concerns, a when question and a what question. When will these things take place, meaning the destruction of the temple, and what will be the sign of your coming in the end of the age? Previously, I showed you that if we compare with Luke's version, we can know where the first topic ends and the second begins, because Luke only includes the first topic, the disciples' question about the destruction of the temple. However, Luke does not include the second topic, neither question nor answer. In my chart, you can see how Matthew and Luke's versions are parallel, then Luke's version stops after topic 1, while Matthew's version continues with topic 2. From this, we know that Matthew 24, verses 4 to 35 are Jesus' answer about the destruction of Jerusalem. Those events happened in our past, as documented by historians, and Jesus said to the disciples that their generation would not pass away until all of it took place. I explained all this in the previous videos. Now we're ready to look at part 2, Jesus' answer to the concern about his second coming in our future and the end of the age. And in this study, we will get his answer to what are the signs of the second coming, the very question that they asked. Now you need to understand this because there's confusion about which part of Jesus' answer addresses which concern. And there are bad teachers out there who think Jesus jumps from topic to topic back and forth with no indication of the switch. Of course, they claim to know which is which. But that's false. Jesus doesn't jump back and forth like a bad communicator. A good communicator, when asked a two-part question, would answer all of question 1, make a clear transition to question 2, then answer all of question 2, and stop. We've figured that out. Are we smarter than Jesus? No way. And Jesus does it exactly like that. So, having finished showing you his answer to question 1, let me now show you the very clear transition that Jesus makes. In fact, it's so clear, I think you can spot it. I'll just read the end of part 1 and the beginning of 2 and have you spot the transition. Matthew 24:32.
From the fig tree learn her parable. When you see her branch become tender and the leaves sprout, you know that summer is near. In the same way also, when you see all these things, you know that it is near at the door. Truly I say to you that this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will certainly not pass away. But concerning that day and hour, no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, but only the Father.
Did you see the transition? Let me point it out. In verse 36, Jesus begins with the word but. In Greek, it's used just as we use it to mark a transition and to make a contrast between two things. This thing is one way, but this second thing is different somehow. Thayer's lexicon describes this function of the word.
It serves to mark a transition to something new. By this use of the particle, the new addition is distinguished from and, as it were, opposed to what goes before.
So Jesus uses but to mark a transition to something new, his answer to the second concern, and he prepares them to learn that this answer will be distinguished from the first in some way, perhaps even an opposite. He continues, but concerning. Now this phrase is used to indicate which new topic he's addressing. Notice how Paul uses the exact same Greek phrase in 1 Corinthians, where he answers many concerns of the people there. Each time he switches topics, he specifies what the new topic is. Chapter 7. Now concerning the matters about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. Next chapter, new topic. Now concerning food offered to idols. Chapter 12. Now concerning spiritual gifts. Chapter 16. Now concerning the collections for the saints. And on he goes. By this we know that was a common way to switch topics in those days. Jesus does the exact same thing using the same phrase. Paul's now concerning is the same as what's translated but concerning when Jesus says it. All right, Jesus says, but concerning that day. He's switching topics, making a contrast, and specifying what the new topic is, that day. That day is the very day asked about in question 2. You're coming at the end of the age. When Jesus returns, it's the last day. There's the general resurrection, the final judgment, and eternity begins. It's such a huge, momentous event that it needs no qualification. You know, that day. We see the same usage earlier in the Gospel of Matthew.
On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you, depart from me.
This is Judgment Day, and people are coming to Jesus, who is the final judge, and trying to justify themselves. Look at all the great works I did. But they didn't have a relationship with him, so he sends them away. When is this? You know, that day, the day of his coming, at the end of the age, which was the disciples' second concern, and exactly what Jesus transitions to in verse 36. All right, he says, but concerning that day and hour, no one knows. Here, Jesus specifies the contrast that was signaled by the word but. Unlike the first question, no one knows the timing of his return. And notice how close the verses are that sharply contrast. Verse 32, when the tree sprouts leaves, you know summer is near. Verse 33, when you see all these signs, you know it is near, the destruction of the temple. Verse 36, but concerning that day, no one knows. The contrast is between what can be known and what cannot be known. And here we begin to find the answer we've been looking for. Regarding the destruction of the temple, he says, just as the fig tree leafing is a sign that summer is near, so all the signs listed in part 1 indicate the temple's destruction is near. You know the timing by the signs. But regarding the return of Christ in our future, no one knows except God. None of us can know, which suggests there are no signs. If there were signs, we could know the timing. That's the very principle Jesus is teaching. But maybe we didn't hear him right. Let's keep reading.
For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day when Noah entered the ark, and they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away, so will be the coming of the Son of Man.
When Noah's flood came, the people were unaware. They didn't know when it would come. That they were eating and drinking means they were going about their normal daily routines, and that they were marrying means making long-term plans. Remember, in that culture, a marriage begins with a betrothal, then the bride and groom were separated for about a year while preparations were made. Then there was a wedding feast, which could last 7 days. These people were making long-term plans for marriage. But if you knew the world would end in a few days or months, you wouldn't be making long-term plans, and your daily routine would be disrupted. And they couldn't know the flood was coming because there were no signs. Even Noah didn't know the timing. Yes, he knew a flood was coming, but not when. Read the passage. It doesn't say, on the day God had appointed, Noah went into the ark. He just checked his calendar. No, it says, God told Noah, go into the ark, you and your family, for in 7 days I will make it rain. Noah was ready, having the ark built and the supplies ready, like food and water, but he didn't know when it would come until 7 days before. He didn't know because there were no signs. Jesus goes on to say people will be working in the fields, grinding at the mill, more daily tasks. People are going to work. If you knew the end was any day now, would you still go to work? At least the same place you work. Then he says,
Therefore, stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming.
Once again, no one knows when Jesus is coming. But if there were signs, we could know, as Jesus taught us in the fig tree parable. When he says here, you do not know, that's a generic you, like nobody can know. But notice he includes his disciples. Since no one can know when he returns, it was possible it would happen in their lifetimes. So they were required to be ready at all times, just as we are. But in this statement, Jesus teaches even his disciples will not know the time. I point this out because there are bad teachers who say, well, the unbelievers don't know the time, but we can. Wrong. Jesus says, you do not know. Then he tells how his return would be like a thief in the night at a time when the master of the house does not know, and concludes,
Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect.
Again, no one knows, including the Christians. We are called to be prepared, like Noah, and to trust God with the timing. Finally, Jesus tells about a faithful servant and a wicked one, how neither one will know when he returns.
Who then is the faithful and wise servant whom his master has set over his household to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions.
Here's some advice from Jesus. What will the wise servant be doing in his master's absence? Feeding the people in his household. Will he be out seeking the timing of the master's return? Will he be trying to read the tea leaves or calculate the date of the second coming? No, it says he will be found by the master feeding the household. Not he will be standing on the rooftop waiting to be raptured. The faithful servant will be found by the master because the servant doesn't know when the master will return and will be too busy doing his master's work to care. It would be like if I were sitting at my desk editing this video and Jesus tapped me on the shoulder. Oh, my master's here. I didn't notice you come in because I was so busy. Does this mean I don't have to finish editing? But what about the wicked servant?
But if that wicked servant says to himself, my master is delayed, and begins to beat his fellow servants, and eats and drinks with drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, at an hour he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and put him with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Rather than feeding the master's household, the wicked servant is beating them, and rather than using his God-given abilities to bless the world, he'll be squandering those abilities in feeding himself. Will he know when the master is coming? He will not know and will not expect it. And since that day is Judgment Day, he'll be thrown into the place of weeping and gnashing of teeth. I don't think I need to tell you where that is. You know, that place. Which brings us to the end of Matthew 24. Next time, we'll look at the parable of the 10 virgins. Let's review. Jesus makes a very clear transition in verse 36 from talking about the destruction of the temple to talking about his return in our future. He also makes a clear contrast between the two. You can know when the temple will be destroyed because there are signs, but you can't know when the second coming is because there are no signs. The signs of the temple's destruction were given in his first answer: war, famine, pestilence, and so on, all of which preceded the destruction in 70 AD, as I explained previously. But we see in verse 36 and following that there are no signs of the second coming. Jesus says, no one knows the day or hour. You, disciples, do not know. It's an hour and day you do not expect and do not know. It's like a thief in the night. It's like the days of Noah when they were unaware. And it's like 10 sleeping virgins, as we will see. And all that's just in Matthew. When we go to Mark's gospel, we see more of the same. But notice verse 33. Jesus says, you do not know when the time will come. This answers a false teaching you may hear. Some will say, sure, we can't know the day or hour, but we can know the season, the general time frame. But this verse shows that's wrong. You don't know the when, and you don't know the time. This word translated time here is also translated season, as in when the season for fruit drew near. Or better yet, when Jesus said to his disciples, it is not for you to know the times or seasons. So no, you can't know the when, the time, nor the season of the second coming. And when we go on to Luke's gospel, well, there are even more. Notice verse 17:23. Jesus says,
and they will say to you, look there, or look here, do not go out or follow them.
Here is more advice from Jesus. When you hear people saying, look over there or look over here, do not follow them. And what do we have today in the church? So many teachers saying, look there, war in Israel, or look here, COVID-19, that's a pestilence, or look there, another big earthquake. Surely the Lord is coming soon. What would Jesus say? Do not go out, do not follow them. And they've been doing this for 2,000 years, and they're always wrong because they're twisting the scripture. And this passage, Matthew 24, is one of their favorite targets. But it doesn't seem to matter to these prophecy teachers how many times Jesus said you cannot know the timing of his return. They won't ever quit predicting the end or looking for signs. I try to picture myself as one of Jesus' first disciples in order to get into that mindset and read the text in context. And I imagine if I'd been there hearing Jesus repeat this over and over, you cannot know, I would have said to him, Master, we heard you the first time. Why do you keep repeating yourself? No disciple of yours would ever think to predict the time of your return now. I think Jesus would have put his hand on my shoulder and said something like, Oh, my son, have you not read what is written in the prophets? Were I to write for him my instructions by the 10,000s, they would still be considered a strange thing. One last chart. Since Jesus calls our attention to the difference between part 1 and part 2 of his answer, let's look at some of those, because it confirms even more that we have two topics split precisely at verse 36. When we compare his teaching on the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple with his teaching on his return in our future, we see you can know the timing of the destruction, but you can't know when he returns. For the destruction, he gives a list of signs, but for his return, no signs are given. The lead up to the temple's destruction was gradual and expected, but his return is sudden and unexpected. For the destruction, the disciples are given specific instructions. Flee to the mountains, don't come down, don't take your cloak, don't be led astray. But for his return, no specifics, only general instructions, be ready at all times. For the destruction, there is a timing given. It will happen within one generation, but for his return, there is no timing given, and I could show you more. So what do we do with all this? I'm showing you what Jesus taught so you won't be led astray. These false teachers we have today are the kind that Jesus spoke about. Don't follow them. If you have been, just stop. Get out before it's too late. Everything I've shown you here is in the red letters, the very words of Jesus. But these people are twisting his words, and that can put you in danger. The Bible says,
If anyone teaches a different doctrine and does not agree with the sound words of our Lord Jesus Christ, he is puffed up with conceit and understands nothing.
These bad teachers who are seeking for signs of his return, they understand nothing, so you don't need to listen to them. And Jesus said, an evil and adulterous generation seeks after signs. Don't fall in with such people. It won't go well on Judgment Day for people Jesus has labeled evil and adulterous. Also, these false teachers are sowing fear into the church with their myths about violence, death, and horror they say Jesus is bringing to the earth. Do you know there's a condition called rapture anxiety? Look it up. It's where people are so filled with fear about the Antichrist and Armageddon and all that nonsense that's claimed to be coming in the future that they end up with terrible anxiety. That's awful. We're not given a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind. And when God brings about the end of history, it will be a great blessing for us, not a nightmare. Those who are sowing fear among brothers, making people afraid of God and Jesus and the future, are committing spiritual abuse. Jesus said the wicked servant will be abusing members of the master's household. These prophecy teachers aren't feeding the sheep, but poisoning them with fear and doctrinal error. And what did Jesus say would happen to wicked servants when he returns? We need to pray for these people. But as for you, be a wise servant. Do you want to hear Jesus say to you, well done, good and faithful servant? Then give up scanning the news headlines, looking for signs. Give up trying to calculate the time of his return, and give up feeding on the poison of fear and anxiety that's being put out there. Instead, be ready for his return at all times. Devote yourself to serving God in all you do, and let Jesus find you busy. Let him find you busy feeding his household when he returns on Judgment Day. I pray that I've blessed you. If you heard something useful, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. It really helps the ministry. Thanks for watching. God bless you guys. There are no signs.